Okay, folks, we are waiting for the election results to come in, and while we're doing that, I thought maybe I'd make a video about something that a lot of people are complaining about tonight, which is the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is an interesting creature. When the Founding Fathers were in the Constitutional Convention and trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to elect the president, the one thing that they knew they didn't want was majority rule, just straight up majority vote across the country. And ironically, one of the main reasons they gave was that they were afraid that if the people were just allowed to vote on the president at large, then any kind of like celebrity figure or demagogue who captured the minds of the American people with just, raw persuasive power would be able to overtake anybody who was actually well qualified to fill the shoes of the president. And so they didn't want majority vote. And the irony of that is that, of course, who has been the latest person to have actually captured the American people's minds and step into a role for which the other half of the country believes that he's clearly not qualified for? Well, of course, we're talking about Donald Trump. Donald Trump, to me, really seems like exactly the kind of person that the founding fathers were hoping the Electoral College would stop from becoming president. And the fact that it ended up not working that way makes it kind of incumbent upon us to look at the Electoral College and see exactly just what the heck is going on then. What is the Electoral College really trying to do? Because it's very interesting that the Electoral College today is not performing anything like the Founding Fathers expected. So, in the beginning, if you look at the original Constitution, you forget about any of the amendments that deal with presidential elections, what you will find is that a state would vote for electors, and then the electors would go to Washington, D.C., and they would elect a president. And the way that this, now, it's not specified very much in the Constitution how that electoral process in each state is supposed to go. But the main idea, the main takeaway, is that the Electoral College was supposed to be made up of good people, good, solid people from that particular state who had the political wherewithal and awareness to elect the next president. In other words, you as a voter would not be choosing a president. That was never the intention of the Founding Fathers. Mike Partika, would not go to the polls and say, I'm voting for Donald Trump or I'm voting for Joe Biden. Instead, there would be some electors, or maybe a slate of electors, or maybe individual electors. And I would look at those particular people, I would be voting for those people to become electors. And then those electors would go to Washington and figure out who the president should be. In other words, I was trying to, on the assumption that I myself am not qualified to know who would make the best president, I would instead appoint somebody who I trusted to go to Washington, D.C. and elect the president in my stead. So let's say that, and I'm just going to toss a name out. Let's say that Mark Cuban is somebody whose political acumen you trust. I don't know why that would be, but I'm just pulling this example off of the top of my head. Let's say that Mark Cuban, who I believe is still a Dallas resident, so he would be a Texas representative. Mark Cuban would be someone I could vote for to be an elector. And then he, as an elector, assuming he won, assuming enough people chose him as an elector and he qualified, so he's going to Washington, D.C., and he would be one of Texas's people who's going to elect the next president. Now, the number of electors, we know, is set according to each state's number of representatives and number of senators. So if you're a state with one representative, then you get 3 electoral votes. So you would be voting for 3 electors. Texas, I don't know. I think Texas has about 30 electoral votes. So we would have 30 people that we would be sending to D.C. to elect the president, to figure out who would make the best president. And what's really interesting about their voting process is that they were really voting not for president and vice president as if they were, part of a political party, and I'll get into the influence of political parties in a minute, but they would just basically cast their votes for president. And whoever got the most votes became the president. And whoever got the second most votes became the vice president. So let's say that Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the top 2 people in the running among all these electors to be president. You could actually have a situation where you had Donald Trump be president and Joe Biden be his vice president. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? But that's the way that the original Constitution was. So the 12th Amendment, I believe, separated out the votes for president and vice president, but each elector still voted on who he thought should be president and who he thought should be vice president. Now, I think political parties started getting into the mix. So let me go ahead and start talking about the political party portion. I'm sorry about this. I just ate some potato chips and I've got crumbs all over me. Political parties are really what has screwed things up. Because prior to the formation of the Constitution, even though there were Tories and there were Whigs, that mainly had to do with whether you wanted to break away from England or not. But parties was not something that was looming large in the minds of the founding fathers. For starters, that was something that would come to develop over George Washington's presidency, to the point that when he gave his farewell address, one of the main subjects that he covered, aside from not getting entangled in foreign treaties, was political parties and the rise of political parties and how much influence they were having. And when it comes to the presidential election, they have a tremendous amount of influence now, more than the founding fathers ever envisioned when they created the Electoral College. Because what's happened? What's happened is, because political parties are now the ones who pick who's going to be their presidential candidates, the states have changed their voting laws with regard to the electors to say, instead of you directly voting for someone like Mark Cuban, who is going to go and vote in your place, you instead are going to vote for a political party's candidate. And then, according to the voting laws, your vote will be tallied up, and whoever's political party's candidate wins, the electors from that party who have been assigned to vote for that candidate will be the one to go to Washington, D.C. So let's say that the Republican Party, there's 30 electoral votes in Texas, and I'm just making that number up. I think that's close to what it is. Let's say there's 30 electoral votes in Texas, and the Republican Party has selected 30 people who have pledged that they're going to go to Washington, D.C. and vote for Donald Trump. Likewise, the Democrats have 30 people lined up who they have pledged, and all 30 of these people have pledged that they're going to go vote for Joe Biden. Now, who wins? Well, the way that Texas is set up, it's winner take all. And that's the way most of the states set up. I think there's like 2 states that don't have a winner take all system. And winner take all means that whoever wins the popular vote in that state, because they're collecting all the votes of people who say, I want Donald Trump or I want Joe Biden, even though what that really means is I want Donald Trump's electors and I want Joe Biden's electors. But they're going to count up all those votes, and then they will send the 30 people whose candidate has won that popular vote in that state. And so those 30 people who are pledged to a particular candidate will go to Washington, D.C., and they will elect the president. And generally speaking, nobody goes and changes their votes. In fact, I think they actually, I think the Supreme Court has actually said that you can punish people who do change their votes. So there's a lot of incentive not to. It would be a great betrayal of the party, and it would be a great betrayal of the voters at that point as well. But, there might, I mean, you'd pretty much have to be a snake in the grass to do something like that. So, that the fact that the parties have gotten involved and they have gotten so entwined with our constitutional system that the Electoral College really doesn't function the way that it's supposed to, because the whole idea, remember, is that you and I were never actually supposed to be voting for president. We were just supposed to be voting for good people, solid people, to send to Washington, and they would elect the president. We would send people we trust to elect the president. It wasn't supposed to be us, but now it's us. And so it's almost kind of a majority rule thing, with the exception of the fact that it's winner take all, state by state. And that's why things get so lopsided, because now people feel in states like California that's so solidly blue that your vote doesn't count for much, because you're just going to get swallowed up in all the blue votes out there, and all of California's electoral votes are going to go to Joe Biden. It's just going to be, that's just the way it's going to happen. So when people talk about the Electoral College, one of the things that they talk a lot about is the idea of, it makes the smaller states more important because proportionally they have more votes than they would. Their vote counts more than they would if you just counted by population, which is true. Because the House is capped at 435, there's only so many electoral votes to go around. There's 538 total, which is why they say you need 270 to win. That's roughly half of 538. So you've got these states that have these apportionment out of these electors, and the smaller states do get a more proportion, or a higher proportion of counting toward the presidency than they otherwise normally would. And that is somewhat intentional. The founding fathers did want to kind of balance it out. But one thing I will say is that the founding fathers themselves in the Federalist Papers basically say, the Electoral College is the best thing we could come up with at the time, and we don't actually know if it's going to be a good system, but we're going to try it. It's the best thing we could think of, and it seems, about as reasonable as any other thing that we've ever tried. So let's try it and see how it goes. Well, I think it has, for the most part, worked pretty well over the years, but you could make the argument that because it's not really working the way that the founding fathers intended anymore, that there needs to be some sort of electoral reform. You remember I mentioned that two of the states in the United States don't do a winner-take-all system. If I remember correctly, there are two electoral districts in, is it Nebraska or Kansas? I don't remember. Maine, I know, is a state that doesn't do a winner-take-all system. What they have is they have 4 electoral votes and 2 congressional districts, and so they split the state in 2, and so they assign 1 electoral vote to half of the state. They assign another electoral vote to the other half of the state, and then 2 of the electoral votes go to the general population, the whole popular vote within the state. So there's 2 winner-take-all votes, and there's 1 that's kind of half for a half, and 1 for another half. So the states can do it however they want, and there are many states now, and I don't agree with them doing this. There are many states now who are trying to put together what's called the National Popular Vote Compact. And the National Popular Vote Compact basically says, instead of our state assigning whichever electors the people choose to go to Washington, D.C., our state will take whichever candidate gets the most votes nationwide. Once the popular vote nationwide has been counted, and we will send that party's worth of electors. So let's say that in Texas, we voted, and I'm just going to toss this stupid number out here. Let's say that in Texas, we voted 90% for Donald Trump. 90% of Texas voted for Donald Trump. Well, what if Joe Biden gets 51% of the popular vote? Well, then, all 30 of the electors in Texas go to Joe Biden, even though he lost Texas by 90%. So I'm not a huge fan of that, and the reason they're doing that is the reason I'm not a huge fan of it. It turns the Electoral College into sort of a pseudo popular vote, and that's something that I just really don't agree with, because the founding fathers stated, for the record, that's not what they wanted. They didn't want it to be a popular referendum. Now, having said that the national popular vote is a bad idea, that's not to say that there aren't any potential other reform measures that we might not want to look into in the future. For example, there is a lot of discontent among people who feel like their votes don't count. If you're in a blue state like California that's just solid blue, you're going to feel like you're never going to, get your way as far as the president goes, so why even bother showing up at the polls? Well, one thing that we could do nationwide in each state, if they choose to do so, is say, okay, and I say if they choose to do so, they would probably never choose to do so, because winner take all is a very powerful come to me kind of strategy. But I would say that it would probably take a constitutional amendment to require that the states do this. So, but what we could do in that case is have a policy that says the electoral votes of a state will be split proportionally according to the popular vote in that state. So let's say that, in Texas, Donald Trump got 50% of the popular vote and Joe Biden got 50% of the popular vote. Let's say they were neck and neck. Well, then 15 electors from the Republican Party would go to Washington, D.C., and 15 electors from the Democratic Party would go to Washington, D.C. So that would be a way to kind of do more of a kind of blend in that case. It's still not really what the Founding Fathers envisioned, but it's a little bit closer to being more representative of counting how, you would be sending your trusted representatives off to Washington, D.C. So all that's to really say that the Electoral College, it's a good institution, but it's not a perfect institution, and it isn't working the way that it was supposed to work. And I think that gives us room and gives us play where we can really look at it over the next few years. I don't know how seriously that's actually going to happen, but to try and figure out are we doing this in the best way possible? Does the Electoral College need reform? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll see what happens. So, well, good luck to everyone who voted. I'm glad that we're finally at the end of this giant crap show, and I don't know how long the vote counting is going to take, but I hope that things are solid one way or the other to be able to declare relatively soon for one candidate or the other. It's going to be really, really interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up with a court battle here and there. I was around for the 2000 election where, no, not the 2000, was it the 2000? Yeah, the 2000 election where George Bush and Al Gore's fight got all the way to the Supreme Court. That was interesting, but I'm hoping we don't see a repeat of that. I don't know what it's all gonna look like though. So try to keep calm, and there's my phone for no freaking reason, so I'm just gonna go ahead and sign off now. I'm Mike Partika. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you later.